Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and bring you the insights that really matter from today's sources. We've got quite a mix, shifting politics, some cutting-edge science, a hard look at public health numbers, and even some high-stakes cricket. Our goal, to quickly give you that deeper understanding, those aha moments you miss just skimming headlines. So let's jump right in. First up, an editorial looking at Bangladesh. It's focusing on the year since Professor Mohammed Yunus's interim government came into power back on August 8th, 2024. And paints a pretty stark picture, actually. The argument is that what was initially promised hasn't quite matched the reality on the ground. The piece says many myths have been shattered. One of the biggest myths it tackles is this idea that Sheikh Hasina's ouster was purely a spontaneous students' uprising. The source suggests something, well, much more organized. A meticulously designed regime change operation is the phrase used. And it gets specific, alleging involvement from Jamaat-e-Islami, JI, that is, the radical Islamist party, saying they were the real force behind it. It also mentions alleged support from Pakistan. And interestingly, backing from powers like the US and China, the source seems to feel Genoa is really pulling the strings now, behind the chief advisor. Quite a different narrative, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It completely reframes the event.
Hmm.
And this analysis goes right to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
The legitimacy, the constitutional validity of the Yunus regime itself. I mean, yes, they took an oath of the Constitution, but the critical point the article makes is that the Bangladeshi Constitution, it actually has no provision for this kind of interim government. None at all.
So a legal gray area or maybe even black hole?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Now, the High Court did restore the caretaker system later in December 2024, but, and this is key, this Yunus government, it doesn't qualify as a caretaker government. The source is clear on why. It violates the rules, the requirements about neutrality, about being non-party. They haven't met those standards.
Okay.
And then there's the makeup of the advisory council.
Yeah.
The article points to the inclusion of members from groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, Islami Andalan Bangladesh, Hafizat-e-Islam. And it mentions a deleted tweet from one advisor, apparently expressing a desire for, well, a caliphate based on Sharia law, even talking about civil war to achieve it.
Wow, that's a wreck.
It is, and it connects to this broader concern the article raises that the strong Islamist ideology of those now in power is alienating a lot of the population. So it really makes you question the long-term stability, the democratic path forward for Bangladesh under this setup. The takeaway seems to be what looked like a popular movement might be way more complex, maybe externally influenced, with potentially huge consequences.
A really sobering perspective on Bangladesh. Okay, let's shift gears completely. We're moving to India now and looking at its push for decarbonization. Specifically, the huge boom in electric vehicles, EVs, and battery storage systems, BESS. The growth numbers are just, well, staggering. India's lithium battery demand for EVs 4 GWh back in 2023, the projection for 2035. 139 GWh. That's an incredible ramp up. And while it's great for climate goals, obviously brings this massive environmental challenge right alongside it. Our source really highlights the risks of just dumping these lithium batteries improperly. You've got hazardous stuff leaking into the environment, soil, water, and the scale is already huge. In 2022, lithium batteries apparently made up 700,000 metric tons of India's total 1.6 million tons of e-waste. Now, the government did bring in rules, the Battery Waste Management Rules, BWMR, in 2022, and they set up an extended producer responsibility, or EPR framework. I'm trying to get a handle on it. But it seems there's a snag.
There is indeed. And this is the core problem the source identifies. The EPR floor price, the minimum amount producers have to pay towards recycling, is just too low.
Too low.
Meaning it doesn't cover the actual costs of doing proper, safe recycling. Think about it. Safely collecting and transporting hazardous waste, using the right tech to stop leaks, skilled workers. That all costs money. If the price mandated by the EPR doesn't reflect those real costs, then the legitimate, responsible recyclers, they simply can't make it work financially. They can't compete.
So what happens instead?
Well, predictably, you get the informal sector stepping in, or even fraudulent operations. They might issue fake recycling certificates without actually recycling, or worse, just dump the waste somewhere. It ends up polluting anyway.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately kind of similar to issues we've seen in India's plastic waste sector,
Right, I see the parallel.
And this is not just pollution. There's a big economic loss, too. These batteries have valuable stuff inside: cobalt, lithium, nickel, rare minerals. If we're not recovering those, India ends up having to import them. Experts estimate this could cost over $1 billion in foreign exchange by 2030. We're throwing away resources.
And are the big companies complying?
Well, the article mentions resistance from some large manufacturers. It suggests some might have, let's say, different environmental standards for different markets, allowing them to kind of sidestep responsibility in places like India. But here's the interesting bit. The source argues that raising the EPR price doesn't have to mean higher costs for you, the consumer. Apparently, manufacturers have benefited a lot from falling global metal prices recently, but haven't really passed those savings on. So the argument is they likely have the margin to absorb higher recycling costs.
Okay, so what's the proposed solution then?
It's pretty clear. First, adopt a fair EPR floor price, one that's actually comparable to global standards. The article contrasts the UK's price, around €600 per kilo, with what's being considered for India, less than a quarter of that, even adjusted for purchasing power. It's a stark difference. Second, beef up enforcement. Proper audits, maybe digitized certificates to track things better, and real penalties for fraud. And third, bring the informal sector into the fold. Provide training, support, integrate them formally. That could massively boost recycling capacity. Ultimately, this isn't just waste management, right? It's environmental protection, it's economic sense, and it's strategically important for India's green future, turning waste back into a resource.
That makes a lot of sense, connecting those regulatory dots to the bigger environmental and economic picture. Okay, let's move to our third topic, a very different but incredibly important one, public health. Specifically trying to understand the real death toll from the COVID-19 pandemic in India. And this is where things get, well, quite jarring. The source points to a huge gap between official numbers and what other data suggests. You've got the civil registration system, the CRS data. It shows this massive spike in overall deaths from 76.4 lakh in 2019 up to 1.02 crore in 2021. A huge increase. Compare that to the official government COVID-19 death toll, which stands at 5.33 lakh. The CRS numbers implicitly suggest the real impact was far, far greater. And then there's a medical certification of cause of death, or MCCD, data for 2021. It did attribute about 5.74 lakh deaths directly to COVID-19. And this is a huge, but the source says this MCCD data only covered less than a quarter, just 23.4% of all the deaths that were even registered that year. When you look at all this, the WHO's estimate of 47 lakh excess deaths in India, which the government disputed at the time, suddenly seems, well, much more plausible, doesn't it? What causes such a massive gap?
It really forces us to confront some deep-seated issues in India's system for tracking mortality. You mentioned the CRS data and excess mortality. That's a vital concept. It helps capture deaths that might have been misdiagnosed, misclassified, or even those caused indirectly by the pandemic's chaos. But its usefulness in India is, well, limited.
Why is that?
Because death registration itself isn't universal. The National Family Health Survey found almost 29% of deaths weren't even registered between 2016 and 2020. That's a huge chunk missing before the pandemic. Plus, the source notes something critical. During the 2020 lockdown, civil registration was actually left off the list of essential services. So right when we needed the data most, the system was potentially weakened.
So under-registration is one major factor.
Definitely. And then there's the second layer, the structural inadequacy of death certification and classification. Even when a death is registered, knowing the actual cause is often difficult. The article mentions observations from Kerala, for example. During the peaks, crematoriums saw huge surges in daily numbers, even ones not officially handling COVID deaths. That strongly points to, misclassification or underreporting of the real cause.
And why is the cause so often unclear?
A huge reason is the lack of medical attention at the time of death. In 2020, an astonishing 45% of deaths in India occurred without any medical professional present. That was up 10 percentage points from before the pandemic. Nationally, only about 23.4% of registered deaths are medically certified with a cause. Without that certification, it's incredibly hard to track disease patterns accurately, plan public health responses, you name it.
Right. And beyond direct COVID deaths.
That's the other crucial piece, the indirect deaths. These aren't caused by the virus itself, but by everything else the pandemic threw at the system. Think about people delaying treatment out of fear, hospitals being overwhelmed, shortages of beds or medicines, post-COVID complications, even the economic distress causing health issues or preventing access to care.
Those ripple effects.
Exactly. That Kerala study the article cites, it estimated 34% of deaths there were indirectly pandemic-related, and another 9% might have been misclassified COVID deaths. Now, if that's the case in Kerala, which has a relatively stronger health system, imagine the potential scale of undercounting in states with weaker infrastructure. It could be much, much higher.
So the real toll is likely significantly larger.
It seems unavoidable to conclude that. The source makes a really compelling argument for a systematic nationwide investigation, maybe a large-scale study, or adding specific questions to the next census. Because this isn't just about getting the history right, it's a fundamental issue for the future. It's a wake-up call, really, for urgent reform of India's whole mortality surveillance system. It's vital for public health protection.
A stark reminder of the importance of robust data, especially in a crisis. Okay, let's lighten the mood significantly. Time for some sports. The recent India-England Test cricket series, our source is buzzing about this one, calls it a classic, an epic, a thrill-a-minute 2-2 ride. 5 tests, 25 days of intense cricket, sounds like it really delivered, and high praise for India's resilience. Especially impressive, given it was a relatively young batting lineup led by a first-time captain in Shubman Gill. They kept fighting back. The piece even suggests India probably should have won this series, the Anderson-Tendulkar Trophy. Apparently, they won more individual sessions than England did, but they lost some key ones at crucial moments, and that cost them the overall victory. Sounds like a series defined by big performances.
Oh, absolutely packed with them. For India, the list is long. Captain Gill himself, record-breaking, 754 runs, the most ever by an Indian captain in a Test series. Incredible debut as skipper. Then you had KL Rahul with twin hundreds. Ravindra Jadeja was super consistent, joined the 500-run club for the series. Rishabh Pant, amazing impact, 200s, 350s, and playing with a broken foot.
Unbelievable.
Right. Yashasvi Jaiswal bookended the series with centuries. Washington Sundar chipped in vitally with bat and ball, and the bowlers Bumrah and Prasidh Krishna both grabbed 14 wickets in just 3 tests each.
Sounds like contributions across the board.
Definitely. But the article singles out Mohammad Siraj for special mention, particularly strategically. He actually took the most wickets overall, 23. It challenges that idea of Bumrah being a one-man army. It positions Siraj more as the reliable rock, the one who held things together, often allowing Bumrah to attack. And crucially, when Bumrah wasn't playing, Siraj stepped up, became the driving force, the enforcer. Both his 5-wicket hauls came in back-to. Test Bumrah missed. He showed real leadership.
Filling that vacuum.
Exactly. And speaking of leadership, Shubman Gill's growth as captain through the series was apparently really noticeable. Showed composure, good tactical sense, seemed to learn quickly.
What about the pre-series worries? Missing Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli?
Yeah, there were huge concerns India might struggle. But interestingly, the article suggests England's own strategy, Bazball, might have unintentionally helped India.
How so?
Well, Bazball often relies on, or leads to, flatter pitches to encourage attacking batting. And those flatter tracks, they gave India's young, relatively inexperienced batters a chance to settle in, find their feet, and build confidence right from the start. An unexpected assist, maybe.
Fascinating tactical point. Any areas of concern highlighted?
Yes, definitely. Looking ahead, the article points to Bumrah's back as an ongoing worry. Needs careful management, clearly. The broader challenge of building a consistently strong group of fast bowlers remains. And Akashdeep's physical fitness was flagged as an issue during the series. The main takeaway here seems to be about physical conditioning. India simply can't afford to carry multiple bowlers who aren't in peak fitness if they want to win consistently, especially in tests. Fitness is non-negotiable.
A sharp analysis of a great series and some key pointers for the future. Okay, let's switch domains again into the realm of science and technology. We're looking at a really fundamental problem. How do you generate numbers that are truly, genuinely random? This sounds maybe a bit abstract, but it's incredibly important for things like cybersecurity and encryption, especially after leaks like Edward Snowden showed vulnerabilities. You hear about methods like Cloudflare using lava lamps, right? Trying to capture unpredictable physical processes. But our source emphasizes even that is only pseudo-random. Why? Because ultimately, even complex physical systems follow physical laws. They're theoretically predictable, even if it's incredibly hard. And the computer algorithms using these seeds, they're deterministic by nature. So true randomness has been elusive. But now, scientists are turning to the weird world of quantum mechanics. The idea is that at the quantum level, randomness isn't just complexity, it's fundamental. Built into the fabric of reality, a totally new approach.
It is a fascinating approach. And the core idea is surprisingly elegant, in a quantum way. Think of a single particle of light, a photon. It has a property called polarization, like the direction its wave wiggles. Before you measure it, that polarization can be in multiple states at once. Superposition. It's like a coin spinning neither heads nor tails. But the instant you measure it, it randomly chooses one state. And that choice, according to quantum mechanics, is inherently fundamentally random. Unpredictable.
Okay, so harnessing that fundamental randomness.
Exactly. And that's what this new study by Kavuri and colleagues in Nature has done. But they've added a really clever twist. It's not just generating quantum randomness, it's making it traceable and provably trustworthy using blockchain.
Quantum randomness meets blockchain. How does that work?
Okay, so here's the basic flow they set up. They start with entangled photons. pairs of quantumly linked particles generated at a top lab, like NIST in the US. These photons get sent to another lab, say CEB, where their polarization is measured. This measurement gives you strings of bits, random data, but it's slightly biased, maybe slightly more ones than zeros, for example.
Not perfectly random yet.
Right. So the next step is a randomness extractor. It takes these biased strings and uses another independent, high-quality random seed sourced from DRAND, this distributed network, including places like Cloudflare and the Ethereum Foundation, to clean up the bits. It produces a perfectly unbiased, truly random string, like 512 bits long. Now, here's the blockchain part, the real novelty. They developed something called the Twine protocol. At every single step of this process, generation, transmission, measurement, extraction, they create a cryptographic hash, like a unique digital fingerprint of the data. These fingerprints are linked together on a blockchain. What this means is, if anyone tries to tamper with the random numbers at any point, the fingerprint will completely change. It becomes instantly obvious, and anyone can independently verify the entire chain of custody, ensuring the integrity of the final random numbers.
That sounds incredibly secure. Traceable, verifiable randomness.
It is. It builds trust in a way that previous methods couldn't. You can prove the randomness wasn't manipulated. It's a potential game changer for high-security applications.
Amazing concept. But how practical is it right now? Are we all going to be using quantum random numbers tomorrow?
Well, that's the important caveat. It's still very much a prototype. The study generated about 7,400 random numbers over 40 days. That's fantastic as a proof of concept, but it's nowhere near the scale needed for, say, securing millions of online transactions every day.
Right.
And it requires really complex, expensive, specialized equipment, lasers, detectors, the whole quantum optics setup, so widespread commercial use. Probably still years away.
Yeah.
But the key thing is they've shown it's possible. Provable, traceable, quantum-based randomness is achievable.
A glimpse into the future of security, perhaps. Really fascinating stuff. Okay, let's move from the quantum realm to something very grounded. Agriculture and global economics. We're talking about palm oil, specifically a looming decline in exports. The source highlights the tough situation for smallholder farmers, using someone like Suratman Mosman in Malaysia as an example. The problem is simple but profound. His palm oil trees are getting old, so they produce less food. Replanting is the solution, but that means no income from those trees for 3, maybe 5 years while the new ones grow. And with government subsidies apparently reduced, making that long-term investment is really hard when you have immediate needs. A real dilemma for individual farmers. So how does this individual farmer's problem scale up to affect the global market? Because palm oil is huge, right? Over half the world's vegetable oil, 85% from Malaysia and Indonesia alone.
It scales up significantly. The source argues the whole market is at a kind of tipping point. After decades of relentless production growth, the combined exports from Malaysia and Indonesia look set to slow down sharply. There are two main reasons cited. One is this issue of aging trees leading to stagnating production yields. The other is Indonesia making a strategic choice to use more of its palm oil domestically for biodiesel fuel.
Okay, aging trees and domestic use.
But here's a critical point the source makes. The problem might actually be worse than the official numbers suggest. Why? Because of those smallholders you mentioned. They account for a massive chunk of the land, about 40% of the total palm oil acreage in Malaysia and Indonesia. And the thinking is, these smallholders likely have an even higher proportion of old, low-yielding trees compared to the big plantations. And they face the biggest hurdles to replanting.
So the official stats might be underestimating the aging problem.
That's what industry experts cited in the article, like Dorab Mistry and M.R. Chandran seem to believe. They estimate over half the trees on Malaysian smallholder plots are past their prime. That's way higher than the government's figure of 37%. And in Indonesia, the replanting efforts are lagging badly. A government target set in 2016 aimed to replant 2.5 million hectares by 2025. But as of late 2024, only about 10% of that target had actually been met.
Wow, that's a huge shortfall.
It is. And when you put these expert estimates and replanting realities together, the projection is quite stark. The source suggests combined exports from Malaysia and Indonesia could fall by as much as 20% by 2030 compared to 2024 levels, a 20% drop from the world's dominant suppliers. That would inevitably have major consequences for global supply and almost certainly push up prices for consumers worldwide. Think about how many products contain palm oil, everything from food to cosmetics.
A huge potential impact stemming from those aging trees and replanting decisions. Okay, for our final deep dive today, let's turn to defense and technology in India. We're looking at the Indian Air Force, the IAF, and its major fleet modernization efforts. A big milestone is coming up. The retirement of the legendary MiG-21 jets in September 2025. They've been flying for over 6 decades. India's first supersonic fighter, first non-Western one too. Of course, they also had that controversial flying coffins nickname because of a high accident rate over 450 crashes mentioned. But they were undeniably crucial in several wars and even saw action as recently as the 2019 skirmish with Pakistan. With these last MiG-21s going, the IAF squadron strength drops again, from 31 down to 29. That's way below the sanctioned strength of 42 squadrons needed. It highlights a serious capability gap. How is the IAF planning to fill it?
It's a critical question, especially given the regional security environment. And it's not just the MiG-21s. The source notes that many older versions of Jaguars, Mirage 2000s, and even MiG-29s are also due for retirement by the end of this decade.
But the pressure is really on.
Immense pressure. The backbone will increasingly be the Russian Su-30 MKIs and, crucially, the indigenous light combat aircraft, the LCA Tejas, in its various forms. But there have been significant problems there. Specifically, the article highlights major delays in getting the LCA Mk1A variant into service. There were initial development hurdles, yes, but more recently, a big bottleneck has been the non-delivery of engines from General Electric Aerospace in the U.S. They cited supply chain issues.
Engines are pretty vital for a fighter jet.
You could say that. A huge contract, 48,000 crore for 83 of these Mk1A jets, was signed. Deliveries were supposed to start around March 2024. But as of the article's writing, not a single jet had been delivered. The very first engine needed for the Mk1A only arrived in India in April 2024, apparently a year and a half late. Meanwhile, the IAF has this urgent need they ideally need to induct 35 to 40 new jets every year, just to stop the squadron numbers from falling further, let alone build back up to 42.
That's a huge number annually. What's the bigger picture plan?
It's incredibly ambitious. Over the next 2 decades, the plan is to bring in over 600 new aircraft. That includes about 180 LCA Mk1A, then 120 plus of the more advanced LCA Mk2. Plus, there's the long-pending requirement for 114 medium role fighter aircraft, the MRFA, likely imported, and then the really big indigenous project, at least 120 Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, or AMCA, which is meant to be a stealth fighter.
A lot of different programs were on
Exactly. And add to that, parallel work on a twin-engine deck-based fighter for the Navy's aircraft carriers. There's even talk, the source mentions, about possibly importing some fifth-generation fighters, maybe Russian Su-57s or American F-35s as an interim measure while the AMCA is developed, because that's expected to be at least a 10-year project itself. And underlying all this are negotiations for engine technology license building, the GE F414 engine for the LCA Mk2, co-developing a more powerful engine for the AMCA Mk2.
It sounds incredibly complex and expensive.
Monumentally so. And what's striking is that amidst all these plans, that MRFA deal for 114 jets we started back in 2019, it seems completely stalled, no real progress reported. So the sheer costs, the long timelines, the technological challenges, the dependency on foreign suppliers for key components like engines, it all adds up. Closing that squadron gap is a massive undertaking for India. The success or failure of these indigenous programs like the LCA variants becomes absolute critical, not just for the IAF, but for India's whole strategic posture.
As we've unpacked these layers of insight today, from geopolitical shifts to the microscopic world of quantum mechanics, it becomes clear that true understanding often lies beyond the headlines, requiring us to look deeper into the sources. What hidden stories, we wonder, are still waiting to be uncovered in the information you consume every day? Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. Apologies if you couldn't reach out earlier. The message inbox was restricted. You should be able to now. As always, we are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.